Welcome back. We're going to keep thinking about this line chart, and we're going to keep thinking about the different kinds of lines that can be present. We started by considering the lines here of the data, and then we moved on to thinking about the lines of the axes. But those aren't the only lines. Sometimes when we have a plot, we have grid lines. And in fact, when we didn't have this template set to simple white, we did have a lot of grid lines. And we went to simple white, and that got rid of the grid lines. So there must be an option for showing these grid lines. Let's think about it just in terms of the Y values for right now. If I wanted to see these, I would say show grid equals true. Now I have grid lines. When I look at these grid lines, a few things we can see is that they appear to be even thinner than the axes lines, although that might be an optical illusion of the fact that they look quite light. And so maybe what we would want is to change the color of this grid. So I can say grid color equals, and let's see what happens if I set it explicitly to black. Now we can see that they are the same thickness, this 1 point thickness. And the problem that we had before was that they were set to maybe gray, or probably even something like light gray, so that they sort of fell off into the background a little bit and didn't compete as much with all the data as when we had this like very strong contrasty black line. Something else that's kind of nice is that this 0 line here was black and these were gray, and that made the black line stand out a little bit more. So we know that we can control the grid color. Probably we could control the grid width as well. So let's set that to 5. And now we're making the grid lines thicker. And then the other things that we've seen we can control with lines is dash. So let's just see if grid dash equals dot is available to us. And it is. Okay, so we're using our understanding of how Plotly normally refers to lines to just take a guess that we're controlling the color of the grid, the width of the grid, and the dash of the grid. Okay, now I think a lot of the times we don't really need grids. I think they're distracting. This isn't really giving us any real new information. But if you wanted to have them, like you're given an assignment where you had to show them, this is a way to do that. One thing you'll also notice is that when I use grid, it's placing the grid line on the major tick mark, and I'm not getting anything here in the minor grid. So just like when we had tick marks, and we could have major tick marks and minor tick marks, maybe we can have major grids and minor grids. And let's see about that. When thinking about how we might add in the minor grid lines, we can think from analogy to how we handled the minor tick marks. When we had minor tick marks, what we did was we used the keyword minor, supplied it to the dictionary, and then just mirrored all the things that we would have done with a major grid. And so let's just see if that works. All right, so minor, we're now accessing not the major parts, not the major ticks, not the major grid lines, but the minor ticks, the minor grid lines. And we'll say dict, and then we just copy the sorts of things we would have done for the major tick marks. So when we wanted to see the major tick marks, we said show grid equals true. And so we can try this. And wouldn't you know it, that's how it works, right? So now all the places that we would expect minor tick marks, if we were showing them, we have minor grid lines. And then we can control these as well if we want separately. What it's done is it's borrowed or has some defaults, I guess, that it's applying to this, and we can change them. So right now you can see that those minor grid lines were dashed, so we could say grid dash equals solid if we wanted. We'll have solid lines. We could say grid color equals, I don't know, pink this time. And then we'll have pink lines. Okay, so this is the way that we can control major and minor grid lines if you want to. Again, most of the time I would suggest that we don't use them. I think they just add clutter with not really increasing any utility, but there are times that we might want to have them, specifically if we had like a log axis or something like that. That can be a nice visual cue to that effect. But for right now, I would say most of the time we don't want them, but it is nice to know how to control those particular lines. One more thing that we should talk about is how to control how many of these there are. And you can see the structure here sort of mimicked that of tick marks, right? We had major grid lines appearing at major tick marks. We had minor tick lines appearing at minor tick marks. And so we can control these the same way, right? If I say in ticks equals 4, then this will control where the major grid lines appear, these dashed gray ones. And then we saw here that we could use dtick to control the spacing between tick marks. So let's say the dtick in this case is 25. And now I'll have minor grid lines between the major grid lines. And so just like how we controlled the tick marks, we can use that behavior to control the grid lines. Essentially, major divisions are where major tick marks and grid lines appear. Minor divisions are where minor tick marks and minor grid lines appear. And we can control each of those aspects, what we show and what they look like separately. That's what's happening here. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.